I have been a practicing clinician in the state of Wyoming as a licensed addictions therapist and a licensed professional counselor since 2001. So I've been in the field for 20 years. It feels really weird to be this far in my life and realize, man, I've been doing this work for this many years. And part of going to obtain my PhD was I wanted to change what I was doing and get out of the substance abuse field and do something different. And lo and behold, I get lured back in because of the knowledge and experience that I have. I am an enrolled member of the Northern Arapaho tribe, and I am also Eastern Shoshone on my father's side. My father was Shoshone, and my Shoshone grandmother told me a long time ago that the Arapaho originated in the Colorado area. Denver, Colorado is actually our homeland, and the government forced us out of there and tried to massacre us at the Sand Creek Massacre, and then put us on the Wind River Reservation where we have resided since then. And it was the government's hopes that both of the tribes would just get rid of each other. Obviously, that didn't happen. But my own grandmother told me if my grandfather were alive, I probably wouldn't be here right now because there was that much animosity towards the Arapaho tribe from him. And I was kind of a little disheartening to hear that he felt that way. I never met the man as he passed away when my father was just a young boy. I now work for the Crow tribe and Crow Agency. I am the clinical services director of their outpatient substance abuse treatment program, and I have been there a little over a year now. I love it. I love it here. I love the people. I'm close to home, so whenever I need to go home, it's just 5 hours drive away for me. So that was one of the decisions that led me to come here. And um, like I said, I've been doing substance abuse and mental health work for Native people mostly for 20 years, and I have come to the conclusion that what is hurting our people the most that are coming to treatment for drug and alcohol treatment is they've got a lot of trauma. And, like I said, the Sand Creek Massacre is just the beginning for many of the tragedies that the Northern Arapaho faced. So as I make this presentation today, I'm sharing with you my knowledge, my understanding as an Arapaho person. So this is a bit of my history, and part of why I did this was it's quite some time ago I was asked by the Wyoming Counseling Association if I would come give a presentation, just anything on Native Americans. And I thought, one of the things that really bugs me when I'm off the reservation is the stereotype of the drunken Indian. And I would meet so many people who meant well, not realizing that some of the things they would be saying to me sort of offended me, especially when they referred to people being drunk Indians. And that was also what inspired me to get a PhD so that we could show people, you know, we can also get PhDs. We're not all drunk natives, and my goal has always been to help people. So this presentation today is titled Trauma Informed Care in Indian Country. We could go on ahead and start moving the slides. Like I said, this is a little bit of the history. Unlike many minorities, natives had resources and means to survive. Like I said, we lived off the land. The Arapaho people were nomadic people. We never stayed in one place. We moved quite frequently throughout Colorado and Wyoming. There are 574 federally recognized tribes with about 175 different languages. And it was the Europeans that introduced disease that decreased the native populations to 10% of what they were at the end of the 18th century. Someone somewhere did a presentation, and I've always wanted to find it, where he actually shows the population of native people in the, across this country, and over time as it just gets smaller and smaller. That's what that just had on. We can go to the next slide. Like I said, I am presenting with knowledge that I have gathered in my own research to try to make sense of this for myself, and especially people that are not native to understand what some of the problems are when we start talking about trauma. On my Wind River Reservation in 2009, I was asked to return to the reservation and direct strategic planning framework. And part of that work for me was to spend a year creating an epidemiology report. So I spent a whole year with some of the people that were working with me, just collecting data. And it was really shocking to me to see that on my Wind River Reservation, about 50% of the students there actually graduate from high school. 50%. I am a high school dropout, so I was very something that made me want to do something about that. Is like, how can we help our people do better in school? And the Wind River Reservation also had 3 times the poverty rate of the rest of the population. 50% of Native Americans on or near the reservation are unemployed. The median family income is about $40,360. A significant proportion of people live below poverty. I grew up in poverty, and when I did my research for my dissertation, I learned that some of the people that I was studying also grew up in poverty. But when you're growing up and you're living happy and things are fine, you don't know you're in poverty. It was just kind of way later, I was like, wow, I was in poverty and I didn't even realize I was. Many drop out of high school. Many don't finish college. When I was starting my PhD at the University of Wyoming, I received a graduate assistantship from the Minority Affairs Office. And one of the questions they asked me on my very first day was, why do Native Americans here drop out of college at 80%? We were dropping out at 80% from the University of Wyoming. And that was mainly the natives from the Wind River Reservation. And I was like, I don't know, but I'll find out for you all. And that kind of turned into what my dissertation was about. I studied that. A lot of the households are headed by females. One of the research that I read, one lady had interviewed 40 Arapaho women who graduated from the University of Wyoming. But that makes me feel good because we have 40 Arapaho women, that successfully graduated. But it was all women because men in our tribe were not graduating at that high of a rate. So it was interesting that the data I collected showed that most of the households are headed by females. And I'm here in Crow Country and I kind of see the same thing. We can go to the next slide.
Hey, Avis, I know you're a soft-spoken person because I know you. Can you talk just a little louder, a little closer to your mic? People are having a little trouble hearing, okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Can you hear me better now?
Yep, sure can.
Okay. I'll just raise my voice.
Thank you.
Some of this here are social determinants, and this is what can contribute to trauma. And so most of the people that struggle with trauma are more likely to be poor, living in poverty. They're unemployed, have a lower level of educational attainment. And this is also the risk factors for substance abuse. There are also high homicide and high suicide rates on reservations. I'm living, like I said, I'm here in Crow Country, and almost weekly I'm hearing of suicides and homicides. And I said it's just, it's how it is where I come from. Use of alcohol and other drugs contributes to the high rates of death from chronic liver disease. And I remember one time, I think it was the director of Indian Health Services had attended one of my presentations in my tribal community. And they stood up and said, a lot of our contract funds is being spent on people with drug and alcohol problems. So I was really glad that the director at that time stood up and made that statement. We can move to the next slide. Again, alcohol and drugs, cirrhosis is the 6th leading cause of death among natives on the Wind River Reservation. 62% of violent offenses involve alcohol compared to 42% of other races. Violent crimes experienced by natives, close to half involve alcohol. So almost all the time when I hear something really tragic has happened on my reservation, and even when I was there, my first reaction was, I suppose alcohol was involved. 9% of it drugs and 14% of it both. So there are a lot of alcohol related vehicle fatalities, about 68%. Sadly, one of my close relatives who didn't drink at all was hit by a drunk driver, and that was really devastating to our community back home. Attitudes towards drinking vary on the reservation, and what the research I collected showed was natives are more likely to binge drink, which means they may not drink often, but when they do, they drink a lot. Native Americans are 6 times more likely to die of alcohol-related causes. Go to the next slide. Native Americans are twice as likely to attempt and complete suicide than the general population. A part of that is caused by low self-esteem, cultural identity conflicts, not having positive role models, having abuse history, social pressures to use, hopelessness and breakdown of the family are contributors to substance use that leads to suicide and engaging in risky behavior. So it just adds to a lot of it. Let me go to the next slide. Here is a little chart that shows the life expectancy. And if you want to look at Native Americans across the state and look at the Native Americans in Wyoming, our life expectancy is much lower. There was a time in my life I used to say, according to statistics, I should be drunk or dead, and I grew up in a home where alcohol problems and use was prevalent. My own mother was an alcoholic, and that's what leads me to the work that I do. I often share that with people. Next slide. This is looking at the health conditions that affect Native Americans. As you can see, we have the higher rate of cancer, heart disease, accidents, diabetes. Look at that. Liver disease, huge problems in comparison to non-natives. And the infant mortality rate was something I hadn't even considered, but that is also a significant cause of mortality. One of the things I learned in my research about trauma, I later in life became a certified trauma specialist because I came to the conclusion throughout my years of working in the substance abuse and mental health field with Native Americans that a lot of us are struggling with trauma. Epigenetics was a new word that I learned in my research and education, and that looks at how biology contributes to trauma. And a lot of the trauma that we experience and even our ancestors have experienced is genetically transmitted. So they can actually test our DNA to see that this PTSD can be passed down through the generations. So there is the scientific evidence that supports that. We go to the next slide. Scientists have found that memories can be passed down through generations, and this is taken from a book called The Mind Unleashed. And childhood trauma also leaves a mark on DNA of some victims. So this is some other research that I read that I found very interesting. That was the first time I actually had heard about that. You can go to the next slide. So going back to the history of Native American people, as I was sharing with you, as an Arapaho, there is evidence that the Arapaho people moved in and out of the mountains of Colorado. We followed the buffalo. Sorry, I see that there's a typo there. The gold rush in the 1860s disrupted the life and pushed our native people north, and we camped in Medicine Bow in Wyoming. There are several trails in the Laramie Mountains, and the beautiful Estes Park region was a place that we often frequented for generations. It's one of my most favorite places to visit to this day. And on November 30th of 1864 was when the Sand Creek Massacre occurred. And I am a descendant of the Sand Creek Massacre. And there are stories about how our people survived, but early that morning, the US cavalry came in and the men had gone out hunting, which was traditional of the men of that time, was to protect our people and hunt to feed the people. So the men were out, so the women and the children were left behind, and that's when the camps were attacked and several Arapaho people were massacred. This is a statement that I found in my research by John Shivington. It says, "Damn any man who sympathizes with the Indians. I have come to kill Indians and believe it is right and honorable to use any means under God's heaven to kill them." This just really was something that stood out to me that I thought was noteworthy to put in my presentation. Go to the next slide. Forced acculturation. Again, we were forced by military escort to the Wind River Reservation. The Shoshones were there first. And as I said, to this day, there is ongoing strife between some people who don't have a more open mind to how we ended up there in the first place, but they are the traditional enemy of the Arapaho. Then we had the boarding schools in the 1900s. Our people were denied practice of cultural and spiritual ways. Families were ripped apart. Children were taken from their families. And many of the children died that were in the boarding schools. So if you've seen what's gone on in the news lately, especially in Canada, sadly, you know, it's happened across this country. It's very heartbreaking to hear those stories. We can move to the next slide. Here's another quote that I know many people have heard quite often that is called "Kill the Indian and Save the Man." This was a motto of Henry Pratt, the most prominent Indian educator of the 1800s. They believed it was essential to take the children from their families and nations to prevent parents from raising their children in their own culture. So the reformers founded boarding schools where children could be isolated from their language, values, and traditions, and cultural erasure was the goal. Next slide. Dr. Maria Yellow Horse Braveheart defined historical trauma as the cumulative emotional and psychological wounding. Excuse me, I had a tickle in my throat this morning. psychological wounding over one's lifetime from generation to generation, following loss of lives, land, and as vital aspects of our culture. The poverty, violence, poor health, suicide, unemployment, addiction, and hopelessness in many Native communities are clear symptoms of unresolved grief and pain due to genocide. It's that our people have been traumatized and are still struggling with that to this day. Change the slide. This is a picture of the Carlisle Indian School. And we can go to the next slide. Several children throughout Indian country were taken from their homes, sorry, and taken to Carlisle Indian School. And in this picture, we had four students, young men taken from our reservation and put in the school. And about about 3 or 4 years ago, our tribe actually went to the Carlisle Indian School to exhume the remains of the children that were taken from our reservation. So it was 13 Northern Arapaho and 2 Shoshone children in 1881 that were taken to the Carlisle Indian School. And when they went to get the children, they had found 4. There were supposed to be 4, but they only found 3. But this picture here shows what they looked like, these children when they arrived. See their long, beautiful hair and their traditional clothing. Their hair was cut and their clothing was changed. I was raised by my grandparents because my mother was busy, not busy, I guess she had an alcohol problem, and my grandmother never drank. But they shared their stories of what the boarding school experience was like for them. And when you talk about intergenerational trauma, it still, makes me sad to this day that they had to go through that. And one of these days, I say I'm going to sit down and actually write a book about. I'd like to talk to other people about their experiences. You can move to the next slide. There is a video that was done, and it's called Home from School. You might be able to find it on YouTube now, but it actually is the documentary of some of our elders from our reservation that went to the Carlisle Indian School to bring our children that had died while they were there. And it's a pretty emotional documentary, and it was showed at the college near the reservation. And so when I was home, I went to that event when they held it. And it was really interesting because, like I said, how many federally recognized tribes do we have? And that we were only one of the few tribes that actually wanted to bring back the remains of our children, because other tribes have a belief that that's not something that they wanted to do, because somebody had asked that question, and I was like, well, at that time I hadn't even thought about that. But the point I wanted to make was the addiction and trauma, like the connection of that. The experience of trauma itself increases the likelihood of turning to substances to cope as a way to self-medicate, escape painful emotions and feeling like they can control them, to regulate and relieve intense feelings, suppress painful memories, find relief, and gain a sense of control. So where I'm living close to the Crow Reservation, there are people in the streets here. And it's really sad to see these people because I know they're struggling with some kind of trauma. And I tell everybody that works in drug and alcohol and mental health with natives that we should treat everyone that walks in our door as if they've experienced some kind of trauma. Change the slide. Some of the substance use is also a part of the reenactment of the trauma. Some express self-blame and self-hate. Some it's to self-soothe, helping to maintain a sense of feeling of self if they're feeling threatened by loss of identity, and to escape perceived rejection, as substance can be seen as a loyal friend, expressing ownership of their own bodies, and to connect with others. And, like I said, I've been here for 20 years now. And I have asked some people, why, what is it? What do you get out of it? What's the reward? There's always some reason. People do basically anything. There's some motivation. And I've had people say that they feel lonely and that's a way that they can connect with others. The use of substances is an initial impulse to self-medicate. For many, it appears to help in the beginning. May give them a sense of stability, as expectations from substances can appear reliable compared to human relationships. It lowers agitation, sedates a spiking of cortisol reaction from a traumatic event, can cause sleep disturbances, nightmares, and other intrusive symptoms. Another problem that we've been battling in the last, let's say, decade now is the opioid problem. So for many, it's calming feelings of rage and aggression. And cocaine and methamphetamine also has an antidepressant impact. So all of these substances are being used to help people that are struggling with substance and have these use disorders because they have experienced some kind of trauma and they're trying to find some way to help themselves. But on the flip side of that, how it really affects people is it compounds the original symptoms. It exacerbates discomfort. That's why I always say, it's the worst thing you can do when you're going through something very traumatic is to use substances. Increases in alienation from others and self, promotes even more dysfunction, keeps the survivor from finding healthy ways to cope. And for a lot of people, it's been generational. So they've learned that when people have problems, they turn to substances. And like I said, I grew up in a family where alcohol was prevalent. So this also prevents them from getting their needs met, takes away control, leading to a loss of control in their life, and it prevents healing. So a lot of times when I get people into treatment, we have to wait for a while for them to be clean and sober so we can get a better look at them on their mental health status. Which also leads to this term called learned helplessness, the cognitive inability to learn new responses to overcome prior learning that trauma is uncontrollable, emotional. The helpless state resembles depression, and the motivational, many have reduced motivation to try new coping responses. So it takes them a long time to feel, they have to have that sense of safety when they come into your building. So the individual they just stop learning new ways of responding. They see no way out. And they just feel like there's no way they can stop or get away from the use because they've done it so long repetitively that it has created a dependence on the substance that they've been using. And change slides. Again, they can't process their own way back to normal response patterns. It takes a substantial amount of time for those that want to change their life and heal. The longer an individual is in an uncontrollable situation, the greater number of times they will have practiced inappropriate responses. Days, months, years, decades, and generations of building highly practiced inappropriate responses, such as drinking, drugs, violence, and breaking the law. I have staff that work for me, and they are the most awesome people. They entered the substance abuse treatment field as peer specialists, but have continued their education and are working towards pursuing their certifications to become licensed addiction counselors in the state that I'm in now. And they have stories. And recently, I took a couple of them to training in California. And it's by the White Bison called Warrior Down. And when we got back, it was really interesting to hear these two open up and tell me that they have traumas that they haven't even addressed themselves yet, or they feel they need help with. So as their supervisor, and they also have another who is the clinical supervisor, I'm the director. And that is something we're working on, is trying to get these people the help that they need, because they're opening up now. They're feeling better about themselves, and they want to get better. They're like, we realize we can't help people until we get help. And I just realized from the training I went to, I have a lot of trauma. I really opened my eyes as someone who's running the program to be mindful of the people that are working for me and getting them the appropriate help that they need. And change slides. So some ways to help Native Americans would be providing culturally based care, or culturally based treatment, which includes traditional practices, Western models of care adapted for Native Americans. You want to involve the community, the family, and emphasizing relationships, respect, having an open door policy as a foundation for culturally relevant interventions, difference in communication patterns, including the ability to tolerate silence. One of the things I learned in researching my own people, the Arapaho people, is just being quiet is considered a good way of life, like the quietness, just that peace is a part of our culture. So when a lot of natives do go into treatment or to counseling for that matter, they don't say a whole lot. Some of my staff that work with me, we have clients that come in that aren't really comfortable talking in front of other people. It takes them a while to warm up, and just to, and I was also told by the people that work here, because I'm not Crow, I have a cultural counselor on board that I use him a lot to kind of compare differences in culture, and he has mentioned to me that for a lot of them, just being quiet, that's a cultural thing for them. And also to honor communication norms of Native Americans, as with storytelling. We are storytellers. If you haven't noticed, as I do any presentation, I'm a storyteller. I tell stories as I'm making presentations. And we're also fun. We understand humor, and we like to tell jokes, and we like to tease each other. And it's not all serious all the time. So I really have a strong emphasis in bringing people back to their traditional ways. You can change slides. Right here, this is just a comparison chart that I saw somewhere that analyzed the Native American AA and the traditional AA, and it just looks at our cultural values in comparison to non-native people. Change the slide. This healing journey. This is an article that I read by Joseph Gahn. He talked about community-based treatment for Native Americans with historical trauma, which is also evidence-based. And 4 themes emerged from his research in that these people that are seeking help have emotional burdens, they're carrying pain, they can get a cathartic disclosure from being involved in community-based treatment. This is where they can confess and purge influence and using self as a project, reflexivity. This is a lifelong process. And I tell people that come to our program, just because you finish this program doesn't mean you're done. What are you going to do when you leave now? You know, how are you going to maintain this for you, or how are you going to live your life? And several of these people will openly admit, I'm not really going to quit. I'm not going to stop. So this is where I look at the harm reduction and, well, how would you do this differently? You know, how would, you know, drinking less, using less, being safe, being careful. Because like I said, some of these people have no intentions of stopping. They're just doing what is required of them. Most of them that come to my program are court ordered. And then to also consider the impact of colonization. So the reclamation of indigenous heritage, identity, and spirituality. So this is what I mean when I say I've learned from my own personal life experience. I've experienced some traumas in my life, but I like to think I'm one of the resilient people, and Native people are resilient. You know, look at what all we have gone through for over 100 years now, and we're still here. So we are probably some of the most resilient people. Some people have what they call this post-traumatic growth, that once they go through that trauma, they actually come back stronger. They learn from that experience in a more positive manner. Change the slide. And when I talk about using our culture as the healing process, this is like learning your language. The Arapaho language for my people is considered an endangered language, so they're working very hard to save it. And it's continuing our cultural practices that we do have. If it's doing beadwork, if it's going to powwows or making regalia, to start dancing at the powwows, or going to your sweat lodge, or participating in your ceremonies. And you know, as I speak, and I share a lot about myself, I'll give some self-disclosure of some of the traumas that I've endured. I am my mother was an alcoholic, and when I was growing up, she would get into relationships where she was physically abused. So there was a lot of domestic violence that I witnessed, and I lost my mother to domestic violence and alcohol, and my own brother, you know, committed suicide, and I never really went to see a counselor. I had my grandparents that raised me and took me to traditional ceremonies and practices because that's what they knew. And it helped, it worked. And so that's why I have my own way of helping people, of, you know, how can we connect you with your past, but not everybody wants to do that. So some people have moved away from that and have their own beliefs. But I always try to encourage that, which is why I have a cultural counselor on board that's Crow, that knows the people, that's highly respected, that can help these people get connected to what they need. And sometimes they come just to see him, which is perfectly fine. That's why we have him. So we have to look at the history of the people and their life experience and how European colonization has affected them. Look at our identity, create more robust post-colonial indigenous identity. So feeling proud of yourself, being proud to be whatever tribe you come from, continuing the traditional practices that you were raised in. Native Hope is coming to terms with the past and our people's own history. Again, that is the history. That's past. We've moved on and we have to, live our lives to make things better for the next generations that are coming. So, sharing our own story and looking at our own past and what have we learned from it that we can use to move forward. A lot of what has happened, trauma, any traumas, it's not always our fault. And begin to truly heal and step into greater freedom, greater hope, and responsibility to live differently than before. A lot of people that do the work that I do come from, abuse. Like I said, my staff that are working for me are peer specialists, and so they come from the experience of struggling with the substance abuse problem themselves. But for me, it was breaking those cycles of trauma and doing things differently, going to school, going to college. And I think that was probably one of the best things I could have done for myself. Hope and courage. Through fully embracing our stories and our past, we can choose to end cycles of grief and trauma to offer better lives for the next generation. And my goal personally was so that my kids did not see the things that I saw when I was growing up, which wasn't really good. And so I also help, if somebody's involved in domestic violence, I try to find, what resources do we have that we can help them. So let go of those bad patterns and let the cycles of abuse and addiction die. There are strong Native men and women that are finding healing now. A lot more of our people are becoming educated and earning degrees. I just hired someone who's in college right now because he wants to do the work that needs to be done in the community that I serve. And he was just like so thankful. And I said, no, I'm so glad that you're here and you want to do this, because not everybody wants to do this work. This is a tough job. We need more counselors out there. We believe stories have healing power, and science backs this up. So narrative therapy is really good to work with Native people. So telling stories, and how can you turn that story and make it a better story? So for me, over time, I've changed my own past by choosing to not engage in drug and alcohol, go to college, help people. So it's finding things to change your own story and make it better. And there is a lady by the name of Dee Bigfoot, who is a Native psychologist in the Oklahoma area, who has specialized in trauma work with children. So if any of you are interested in that, I would look up Dee Bigfoot. So it's always good to share stories of hope and healing. So like I said, I've got people that are working for me that I'm like, man, you are a perfect example of someone that can overcome from walking in the streets and drinking and using drugs for years. And here you are with your college degree, you're here helping your own people. So I just think that's just amazing. So it's people like that that really inspire me to keep doing what I'm doing. Change this life. Some of the cultural constructs that we need to keep in mind is always including the family, having respect, having spirituality and acknowledging that, and traditionalism. These need to be integrated into treatment and prevention in order to gain acceptance from our Native American help seekers. They are really open to these types of interventions when you're working with them. This is the medicine wheel, and I really like to use this because when we talk about wellness, we want to make sure that we're addressing all of these important parts of ourselves. And this is not just for our client, this is for us too. This is for you watching and listening today. Of looking at your emotional part of your life and how you're addressing that. Looking at the mental part of your life, how are you addressing that? Some people are learning, taking classes, reading books. Your spiritual part of yourself and your physical part of yourself. As you saw the statistics that I shared with you earlier, many of our people, and then I see it all over, as diabetes is rampant. And a lot of that is the way we eat, the foods that we eat, and why we're so prone to it is that was never our diet to begin with. We are Native people who grew up surviving off the land of eating, well, my people, we ate wild, I still love wild game. Living off the land of deer and elk and buffalo, and many tribes have different animals that they, it's our traditional diet, the berries and a lot of the stuff that's out there now, the pop, the sugar, the candy, a lot of stuff, but trying to be more healthy. So it's about living in wellness. So I use this in my recovery program for their own continuing care or their relapse prevention plan. We just call it their wellness plan, and so that they have some action steps that they take for themselves. Like I said, this is for us too. It's not just for our clients. If we're going to help people, we need to be healthy too. I stole this slide from a friend of mine at the last presentation I did a while back that Megan was present at. And I just loved it because it makes perfect sense of everything that I share with people in working with people that are struggling with trauma. And if you see on the bottom left-hand side is Bigfoot. The Bigfoot made this diagram here. And so when you look at the whole circle and you look in the middle is our spirituality. That's what's in our heart here. So these are the things that you can use for healing. Like I said, the sweat lodge, the humor and teasing, talking circles, historical horse rides. I've been in this Crow country this is my second year to be here for the Crow Native Days and the Crow Fair. I've just learned so much about these people, and so it's been really amazing to see them keep that horse culture strong in their community here. Our smudging, we smudge and pray every day at our office, looking at they're singing and dancing. Right now we're in the process of building a sweat lodge because back home where I come from, both treatment programs have a sweat lodge. And I've also worked with adolescents on the reservation that were in the juvenile delinquent program. And I've seen families come together that were able to participate in the sweat lodge as a family. Naming ceremonies. Sometimes we have people that come for treatment that don't have a name or were never named. My name is Strong Woman. This name was passed on to me from my great grandmother. So a lot of people don't have names, and those names are very important to our cultural identity. Offering gifts, storytelling, ceremonies, rituals, blessings involving the extended family. So this is like a holistic view from Native American ways of helping people. Yes.
Okay, go ahead and
Okay.
keep going. I don't know what happens when that happens.
Yeah, a while back, me and my colleague Ray Dahl went to Missoula
Uh-huh.
for a presentation, and he had this slide in there, and I asked him if I could steal it, and he said, "Take it and use it." So I thought it perfectly summarizes exactly what I'm trying to teach people. I consider myself an indigenous therapist. There might be all these theories and interventions that are made for non-native people by non-native people, and I feel they don't work. And I met so many people come away saying they didn't feel understood. You know, they just don't understand it. And that doesn't mean nobody can help them. It's just some people will be closed off from it from the beginning, but once you're able to connect with them on uh, an indigenous level, I think it starts to make more sense to them. And for myself, the sweat lodge has been my healing everything. Uh, like I said, I was raised by my grandparents, and grandma would go to sweats and get dressed to go to sweats and drag us along. And now I go there on my own. She's not here anymore, but it's what I learned to help heal our people. And it's a tradition throughout many native tribes here in Crow country. They do this differently, but I have seen people recover from trauma and substance abuse who have just come to sweats. And for some of them, that's all they've done is just traditional stuff. So that's why I really am a big promoter of using these ways to help our people. Native cultures contain all the necessary knowledge to socialize mentally healthy, substance-free youth. This knowledge doesn't need to be replaced with something from the outside that didn't come from us. Cultural ways and knowledge must be viewed as equal to social science, prevention and treatment knowledge. There exists within Native cultures developmental risk and protective factors, and our culture is our strongest protection factor that we do have. So treatment must be culturally specific to be successful to helping our people, even with trauma. Sharing stories as a way of education is one of my cultural considerations. Keeping your session informal in nature and conduct in a comfortable setting, as well as allowing for a flexible start and end time. You know, I've had kids that didn't want to talk, but if we went outside to go shoot some hoops, they start talking. Our horses have been amazing. Many of you have equine therapy. That is a traditional mode of therapy to help people. And like I said, I've learned from personal experience that we prefer to work without pressures or constraints, also known as Indian time. I know we try to say keep things on schedule and at a certain time, but when I was working on the reservation, I often scheduled blocks of time between sessions and groups, knowing somebody was going to be running late because we run on Indian time. And storytelling, this is just like our number one way of working in Indian country. Like I said, we've been storytellers since the beginning of time. As I said, my people were nomadic people, and we didn't have laptops and paper and pens. Everything that we've learned and has been passed down to us has been passed down through oral tradition and storytelling. So that's how powerful it is. And this was a quote I picked up from a movie that I watched. It says, "Let us put our minds together and see what life we can make for our children by sitting pool." So that's why I say everything that we do today is for our generations that are younger people and our grandchildren that are coming into the world now, and how can we make things better for them and help them to be stronger and more resilient. And like I said, a lot of our people are hurting from trauma, and we need to keep that in mind and be understanding to each of these people that come asking for help. Not many people don't go ask for help, and so when they do come to you, they may have not even thought about the trauma that they have experienced in their own life. So it takes time for them to open up. And I've had many people who won't share in the beginning, but in the very, very end, when I'm done working with them, then they finally come out with something. So I've been highly recommending implementing the ACE questionnaire into treatment and counseling programs so that you're able to pick up on those traumas that they may have experienced in their life, because it's also been shown through research that people that have experienced trauma as children are the ones that are more likely to struggle with substance abuse and various mental health and substance abuse problems as well. So that is a good screening tool to use. That about wraps up what I was presenting today. I have some time available to take some questions from anyone. And I'm also open to special requests. I do, I do research. I was looking for my pen. Sometimes people give me ideas from presentations that I do.
Yeah, if anyone, we have a small group here, since whatever glitch happened, but if you guys have a question, feel free to unmute and ask Avis directly.
Hello, Doctor. I just want to just offer, my gratitude for your presentation. It really, really hits home for me and the work that I've been blessed to provide our tribal communities here in California, and just so many parallels in your research and in some of our own areas of study here amongst our people is really fruitful. So I appreciate your work. I really do. And hopefully, I think Gloria Mill was on here. They will invite you to come and present at the UCLA Tribal Echo Project, because I feel like your work is just really valuable to our communities, especially for us here in California. So thank you again. And I look forward to more of your work, and hopefully one day we'll get to meet in person.
That would be really cool.
Absolutely. So thank you again.
Thank you for coming today. I hope you got something to take and apply to your work.
Thank you, Albert. So I guess that about wraps up today's presentation. If anybody does have further questions, Avis's email is up here on the screen, and then we will send you the follow-up email to the email address that you registered with to join today's webinar. And I just want to thank Avis again for the wonderful presentation as always. And thank you, Sean Bear, our co-director, for joining us today as well. So everyone have a good rest of your day. Look for that email, fill out the evaluation if you can, and we look forward to seeing you next time. We'll be back the second Wednesday of the month in October with another MHTTC presentation in our monthly series. All right. Thanks, you guys. Good to see you all. Bye-bye.